you have to be a truth teller, right? I think that is the most important part. You are not supposed to be setting your candidates up for failure. And so it's so important to position yourself in the market where you don't want to be attracting every candidate to your organization. Actually, you want to attract the right candidates into your organization.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Plum Pod, where we talk about all things HR and mental health. I'm your host, Georgia, and founder of Access HR. On today's episode, I'm joined by Marie Chaproniere, talent acquisition leader and founder of Behind the Mask, as we talk about talent acquisition compared with the traditional recruitment model, and importantly, how to be intentionally inclusive during the candidate experience. Marie, hello.
Hi, Georgia.
Thank you for joining me as a guest on today's episode.
Thank you.
Firstly, I would love if we could strip it back and for our listeners to get to know more about you. So there is one question I love to ask every single guest, and that is, was HR part of the plan or did this happen by chance?
I'm sorry to tell you that no, HR was never part of my plan. I grew up wanting to be in performing arts.
Ooh, tell me more.
I think I spent most of my childhood in the dance studio and I studied dance performing arts. And when I was 18, before deciding whether or not I wanted to go to university, I actually ran away to Disneyland. And
Stop, you're living my dream.
so one of my first jobs was actually to perform in Disneyland in Paris. And I always thought that I would continue. I opened dance school quite early on in my early 20s. And I just got to a point where I thought, well, actually, my parents had said, you need a real job now. And so I thought, okay, what is it that I really enjoy? And one of those things was people, getting to know people and understanding, the drivers and the behaviors of people. And so I kind of fell into recruitment and HR in that way, and I haven't left.
And so many of us, I think, really relate to that, falling into it. I absolutely fell into the space as well. Very similarly to yourself, I needed a real job after university, and it was supposed to be temporary. Nearly 10 years later, I'm still in the space, and I don't plan on leaving, to be honest. I really relate to what you said around working with people and enabling them to thrive. So where you are currently, and particularly your experience in TA, which is talent acquisition. So for anybody who hasn't heard of the phrase or potentially doesn't really have an understanding, how would you describe what talent acquisition actually is?
Yeah, I think when we look at talent acquisition, we often think about recruitment. And there is a distinct difference between talent acquisition and recruitment. And recruitment is essentially about taking a job brief, finding a candidate and hiring, making the hire. When you look at talent acquisition, you also have to think about the candidate experience and the journey for the candidate, as well as your employer branding and strategy. So how do you attract and also retain this talent and candidates? So you're looking at things a lot more strategically and a lot less reactively.
And that's so desperately needed in the space. I definitely started my career where it was recruitment as a title rather than the strategical shift to TA. And I'm so on board with that. In terms of when we're recording this podcast, it's 2025. But how would you describe a great candidate experience in 2025?
So when I think about candidate experience, I almost look at it myself, and I am that lens to the candidate in terms of I'm representing what it is like to work at the organization, what it is like to work with me as a recruiter. And so actually I'd flip thinking about a good candidate experience into, well, first of all, what's a bad candidate experience? And a bad candidate experience is a time-consumed, lengthy process. It is ghosting candidates and not getting back to them. It is no personalization when you receive that rejection email. And when I think about these things, that is exactly what we need to be doing. We need to be creating a sharp, very honest, and very human experience for the candidates.
And equally, that goes back to something that we're really proud of as an experience. I absolutely love that you just said to focus more on the bad. I think it's much easier for us as humans to go on, okay, what do we not want to provide for our candidate experience? Once we know those absolute red flags and no-nos for us, we can start to build the good. I really like also that you said around that personalization. And with the rise of technology, there are a few hesitations with, are we losing that personal side, especially with technology and using like ATS systems? From your perspective, have you noticed any difference in technology taking away that human side?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we're almost leaning too much onto technology, where it's great. It can automate a lot of these processes. It frees up so much of our time in hiring, which is so needed as a recruiter because we're often bogged down, in the administrative side of it. However, when you're missing out on, automating that process, you can't automate empathy, right? So when a candidate is receiving an automatic rejection or an automatic invite, and there's no touch points with an actual human in the end, you're really missing out in providing that experience that really makes the candidate say, hey, I really want to work there, or they understand truly what it's like to work at that organization. And so I think there's benefits, but there's also a lot of cons to it. And because of that, we also do see a lot more now people taking to social media.
Yes.
And, candidates are putting themselves in a position where they're using their platforms or they're using platforms to actually call out now poor behaviour, whether it's from a company or whether it's from the recruiter or the CEO of an organization. So we do need to tread very, very carefully and find a balance between, humanizing that experience, but also leveraging the power of technology.
Where I've seen companies not prioritizing their TA is they think of the first experience for a candidate turned employee is the onboarding phase, and they're missing that initial first touch point of the employee life cycle, the attraction phase, and they're not being intentional with how they do that. A lot of companies as well, especially if they're in a hypergrowth phase, will need somebody fast. And sometimes that means that their long thought out strategy and intentional strategy isn't activated. But I've seen that then be really damaging to the experience that they're creating for their candidates. Have you found any real small wins in a candidate experience that you found to be really beneficial for those moments in a hypergrowth phase?
Quite simply, what you can do is really look into your socials, right? Your job descriptions, your social media. What content are you pushing out as a company that shows the candidates what it's truly like to work here? And you can really leverage through things like job descriptions by stating the interview process, for example. So there's less questions up front. You don't need to jump on additional calls and conversations. And
one of my favorite things that I'm noticing in job adverts at the moment is a clear and transparent breakdown around interview stages. I don't know why historically we've kept that to ourselves. And it's really nice to see that we're being much more transparent in job descriptions. And I'm also finding that that was, when it wasn't previously included, the most common question that I was getting from candidates. Like, I'm at stage 1 now. What does that look like? Because I also think the reality is we shouldn't be holding super long, drawn out interview processes of 4, 5, 6 interviews. And that way, then we can start to build transparency, which adds to our culture and the reality of what it's actually going to be like working for us.
Absolutely.
Would you advocate for anybody listening to relook at their job descriptions if they're not including that section currently?
Yeah, most definitely. I think that we've seen that it has proved to be a step in the process that you can really leverage and benefit from, because the candidates know exactly what they're stepping into. And I think that's the most important part. You can also be flexible. And, it doesn't need to state specifically exactly what they're going to be expecting, but at least letting candidates know a little bit upfront. Maybe it's about the culture. Maybe it's diversity statements that you're also including in your job descriptions. There's clear opportunities there for you to also mention your benefits and your perks and what it's truly like to work here. I also see, with automating emails that initially go out to the candidates, you can include links to the hiring managers. You can include your blog. So candidates can essentially have everything up front before they need to jump on these calls and do the research that they need to before taking those steps to speak with you.
And that's also putting companies in such a prime position where they're actually attracting the talent who genuinely want to be part of that organization. And it's about quality of candidates. And I definitely think that's a way that we can start to siphon through candidates who potentially would never be the right fit and add to our organization, but we can then really start to pull and attract those who can add value, but also want to be with us on the journey to where we're going. You started to talk then around really painting the picture of an organization within their job description. I am very mindful that potentially some organizations don't do that correctly. And the reality is, when a candidate is going through that process, they potentially maybe sold one story, then they get in and they see potentially another story. And in my experience, I've found that to be really damaging to the culture. But I'm just wondering, from your experience as well, what response are you seeing from candidates when a potential job description says one thing and then the reality is another?
You have to be a truth teller, right? I think that is the most important part. You are not supposed to be setting your candidates up for failure. And so it's so important to position yourself in the market where you don't want to be attracting every candidate to your organization. Actually, you want to attract the right candidates into your organization. And so being very clear about those things up front is important, because if your culture is chaotic and messy and you are not saying that, hey, things are really messy here, then you've got a gap that you need to fill, right? So I think our approach is always to share with the candidate, tell them truthfully as to what's going on. This is where we currently are. This is where we want to be, and find those candidates that, if you do have that really messy and chaotic process, that you've got the candidates that say, messy, chaotic, great, that's me. Now I can help you get to where you need to be because I can help you build.
And that's where the truth absolutely comes in, because like you say, for some people, that high energy phase of an organization is a bit addictive. People like that. It's not for everyone, and that's absolutely fine. But that transparency and honesty will attract the right people who will absolutely be your advocates, biggest advocates as you're along the journey.
Absolutely.
You mentioned also around diversity statements. I would love to know, from your perspective, how can we be more inclusive during our candidate experience?
Yeah. I think when we look at being inclusive, the thing that I see that's being missed the most on, simply the interview process is asking the candidates, what accommodations can we make? And that is a really great place to start. But also, we need to be very careful when we're asking about accommodations, because are you also representing that you are an organisation that is safe enough for people to disclose, whatever that may be, whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's disability, whether it's other kinds of mental struggles? Are you set up and are you safe enough? And so I think we, as an organisation, need to start flipping that and start providing proactively that information up front. So candidates don't necessarily have to share what accommodations they need, or at least they know from you, if you're neurodivergent, this is how we would accommodate you as a neurodivergent employee or interviewer. And these are the things that we can do to support you as you come through the interview process with us. I think that's really, really key. And then when we also look at our processes, because we also don't want to be making exceptions, right? I think that's something that also comes up, not overhauling the processes that we've already got in place. And we've, spent weeks to build these out with our hiring managers. But it's not about that. It's about becoming more flexible as an organisation and making sure that we are looking at things really through like this cafeteria lens, which I love because we see it a lot more now when we're thinking about benefits in organisations. But we can also look at a cafeteria in terms of our interview processes, because not every candidate and human thinks the same. Not everyone needs the same support during the interviews, and that's totally fine. So to not overhaul the processes, you also need to start thinking about what's really important here. So if a case study is really important, we don't need to remove a case study, but we do need to think about other ways in which candidates can maybe present those case studies and give them the options to still end with the same results, the case study, but also thinking about ways in which you can support them and provide them with this flexibility to show up as they are.
You mentioned the cafeteria. Can you break that down for me, for someone who's not heard that before?
Yeah. I've also only heard it recently, and the way that I'm using it.
Tell me more.
So if you and I were to go into a cafeteria, and we are in the cafeteria and we are going to get a drink, we're going to get our main, and we're both going to get a dessert. But we're two different people. We're most likely not going to select the same drink or the same main or the same dessert. And we have all of these options in the cafeteria to choose from. But in the end, we're going to end both with a drink, a main, and a dessert. And I think that for me, that's the simplest way to identify it. It's the same for employee benefits, as well as our interview processes and how we show up, giving people different options.
Love that breakdown. I've not heard of that before. That's the first time. So when you said it, I was like, ooh, I need a breakdown. And then
I don't know if that is,
but I really
the way. That's
I really
how
like
I'm
the analogy though,
translating it.
because we can't just do a one size fits all, throw it out there and hope that it sticks. We're humans at the end of the day. We're very complex. We all have individual needs. And it is our responsibility as employers to ensure that our people are set up for success, whether that is through the candidate experience or the employee experience as they transition over. And I do really like your perspective on accommodations being readily available in a proactive nature, not waiting for a candidate to say, well, actually, here are the adjustments that I need. It also really paints the picture for your culture internally and how you're supporting your team. Very much, again, being proactive and for them to succeed rather than sitting and waiting, crossing fingers and hoping for the best. For the accommodation side, I'm mindful that sometimes, and at the moment, job descriptions are already quite lengthy with what's going on. How would you recommend for anybody who's listening to get those accommodations across to the candidate that potentially aren't within the job description?
So typically where those questions come in is on the email, actually, not per se in the job description. But what you can do in your job description is first of all state at the very top your mission, your statement around accommodations that you do make or you would make. I would possibly feed it into the job description. However, that's not going to be the place that I, as a candidate, am going to necessarily look for it. I want to know who in your team is, if we're talking about neurodiversity as an example, who in your team is talking about neurodiversity? What do you do around these awareness days or outside of the awareness days? Where on your website am I finding, blogs or articles, or really feeling as though if I do disclose, then I would be supported? It can be done in so many different forms. I really would like to see, maybe a video of accommodations or frequently asked questions on the website.
I've seen a couple of companies having like a hiring playbook, but that's more intentional around the experience that they're wanting to create for the candidates and their people. And it goes back to exactly what you've just been saying. They need to be authentic. I love getting, if we are on the topic of neurodiversity, how do we celebrate our neurodivergent team members in the way that they can articulate it so that me as a candidate, I can really understand how I would be supported? And examples. That's what I've seen work really well. A video, I think that could be
definitely
incredible.
It gives you a visual representation of what's really going on. And especially if you're also using real examples of how, what the company has done to support you as an employee. Zurich in the UK actually did this really well. They are very inclusive with their DEI policies, and they have done a lot of reports on neurodiversity and surveys. Last year, I think it came out around 52% of people who were neurodivergent did not feel comfortable to disclose that they were neurodivergent in the interview process. And that was due to stigma and judgment. And that says a lot. And, they are taking it to a level of which, you could only imagine to be, where they've really looked into their healthcare. And they're also now providing employees the opportunity to actually get a test.
Wow.
Which is, that's where you want to be, right?
Yeah. That's the end goal.
The end goal. But if you actually dive into some of the testimonials as well, it's real people at the organisation. It's not performance culture. They're driving real challenges and collecting real data, and then they're presenting this publicly. And I think if I'm a candidate and I'm applying for a place to work at a company like this, then I will automatically feel included. I don't need to be asked, what accommodations I necessarily need. I might come forward myself, hey, I'm neurodivergent, and these are the accommodations I need or don't need.
And it goes back to being human first. At the end of the day, it would honestly be incredible if a lot more organizations could take some inspiration from your example and start to be more proactive with it. If there is a company that's listening to this episode and they are much smaller, do you have an example or potentially one thing that they could start to do today to be more inclusive in their candidate experience?
Yes. I think it really just starts with an audit.
Yeah.
The same with everything, right? Let's do an audit. How are our job descriptions written? Are we using inclusive language? How are we talking about our perks and benefits and what's important to the people that we want to attract? As we said earlier, it's not about wanting to attract everybody and providing perks that are also not necessary for everyone. It needs to align with the demographics and the culture and everything else. But we can start there, right? And also within your interview processes, how do your interview processes look? Look and dive into your candidate experience surveys that you are hopefully sending to your candidates post interviews to collect that data and find out what are the areas and where do we need to improve. And that might even start with, okay, so what questions are we asking the people that are taking the interviews. So I would really start there. I would really start with an audit, and just reevaluate and have these conversations, because I know through my own lived experiences that I haven't always felt comfortable to disclose if I haven't seen that the company is representing a safe space for somebody who is neurodivergent. And following that, you then go into an interview process where it's chaotic for anyone, let alone somebody who's neurodivergent. So it could be that you're passed around from different people within the interview process. It could be that you're communicating across so many different channels, from, a phone call or WhatsApp to LinkedIn. And so getting those things clear and right, and actually evaluating those things with your team is a great place to start.
Very inspiring as well as a point with that. And I completely agree. When we were talking earlier, it was all around the early attraction stage. I don't think has had much intentionality behind it within organizations. And that's a perfect example of sitting and reflecting on what are we doing currently? What are the gaps? How could we improve? And going back to the question of, if we want to create a good candidate experience, let's pull out all the bad things that we're actually doing. Perfect example, feeling like the candidate has been pulled from pillar to post, going to different people, different social platforms, WhatsApp, Slack, email, you name it. It's not the best experience that we're creating. I'd love to know your opinion on providing interview questions before an interview.
Yeah. I'm all up for this.
Me too. That's why I wanted to know. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I think that it's helpful to anyone, and it gives them something to know what's coming. I think the important thing to do is to provide the questions and to let them know, actually, we'll try to stick with these questions, but we may be asking some other things in between, or, depending on how the conversation goes, it's going to be a very natural conversation. And I don't see anything wrong with that.
Neither do I. I have had it in the past where managers have gone, well, if they know the questions, they can really prepare. But as an alternative, you have people just make things up on the spot anyway. So surely you would rather have somebody who can prepare, really invest their time into it. That's more reflective of what they would be like in the workplace, compared to somebody who's just going to fluff the answer anyway.
Absolutely.
I completely agree. And where I saw that firstly was actually on John Lewis. They've got a really good breakdown. It's a really good example. If anyone's not looked, you definitely should. And I think also we are showing that we really want to celebrate people who want to be along the journey with us. And that's why I wanted to ask that question, because I love it, but it's definitely a little bit contentious from some people.
Definitely. I think it's all about proving that you are trying to set candidates up for success. And again, it kind of goes back to the culture, right? Like, what is your culture?
Yeah.
Are you a culture which allows people to fail?
Yes.
Are you a culture that allows people to fail? Are we open about our mistakes?
Yes.
How do we deal when people are making mistakes, let's say? And I think that's all part of it. If you want people to be authentic, give them the tools. They're going to go out and do it anyway. So people are going to use it. They are going to use it. And of course, we don't want to be seeing the same answers through, it's the same with case studies and so on. If people are using now AI and technology to have their answers, for me, that's also fine, as long as they're also adding some of their own thoughts and personalities, and it's not just a carbon copy of something that's been copied online.
I think as well, as part of that, we can be providing them with a few prompts of, we really want to see your personality. This is your opportunity to share your story, your career experience, so that we can get to know how you could add value to our team. And with the questions, I do think that's a really great way that we can attract some great talent. and holding a few back. I'm definitely all for giving as many as we can, but I think that also allows us to see how people can respond in the moment.
Definitely.
Because it's also okay to respond and say, I haven't overcome that in my career. It's a challenge I'm open to taking forward. That shows more as a candidate and your quality as an individual than, like I said already, somebody just, copying chats response for a situation they've never encountered in their life. It's hard.
I think we're so lucky now with, with the technology that is actually there. Another thing that I have been very comfortable to do, and I'm not sure if every recruiter, let's say, is comfortable. Are you familiar with Metaview?
No.
It's an AI note-taking tool, but predominantly made for recruiters. So we're using it to save time in the recruitment process, and that means we can have a conversation where we're not stuck taking notes. It's taking the notes for us, which is brilliant. But also what we can do with that is we have now all of this information to be able to share back with the candidate, use that as feedback to the candidate when we are moving them along for the process. Or if you have a candidate that isn't quite remembering, let's say, exactly how they answered, and they want to use some of those answers in the next stage, which is potentially that case study, I'm more than happy to send over our transcript from the first interview for them to be able to use it and to use it to their benefit.
And feedback is such a way that we can grow as individuals. And also then we'll see that translate within the organization. If we don't know how are we expected to grow? And it goes back to the most common thread from this conversation. Organizations need to be intentional with the experience, as during the candidate experience, it is an eye-opener to what it is actually like working within that organization.
100%.
Maria, I have one last question for you, and I'm sad that we're at this point. It's gone by so quickly. My question to you is, looking back on your career, what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
This sounds very cliche. I want to come out with be yourself, which sounds very cliche. I think that I am in a period of my life where I am really stepping into not conforming, not showing up in a way that people expect me to show up, because I am great as I am.
Love that. We need more of that.
Yeah. And I think that's the same for, also for when we're hiring candidates. It's not about overselling opportunities to them and providing them with the bells and the whistles as an organization. We want people to be showing up, showing them how it is to work here, seeing who they are as individuals themselves. Because if we're showing up in environments with people that we've just put on this mask, that we are obviously not showing up authentically, and we're going to be ending up surrounding ourselves with people that don't really like us for who we truly are, or we realize that actually we're in the wrong environments, we're surrounded by the wrong people, and this is detrimental in the end to your health and to your well-being.
And by showing up authentically yourself, have you seen a difference?
Yes, definitely. It's quite a scary place to be as well. I think when you're going through that process of kind of peeling off those layers, you start to put yourself in a position of, okay, none of what I'm used to now feels like home, which is a really scary place to be. But the great part of that is that you're really stepping into who you are and what makes you feel good. And it can't get worse than that,
Completely agree. And I think that is such a poignant message to end on. Be yourself. Don't feel like you have to conform, and be brave, because you're a perfect example of how great things can be.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marie, for joining me on today. I really appreciate it. And what a great conversation we've had.
Thank you, Georgia.
Like this episode? Click here for more HR talk. And if you're just catching up, check out our previous episodes right here.